Have you ever looked at an old photograph and felt something was wrong? The stern faces, the eyes, staring straight into the lens, it all seemed familiar. But sometimes, a small detail can take your breath away. Silhouette. A look. As if it didn't belong. They didn't belong at that moment. There have been many photographs throughout history that have held more than what we see. And sometimes, what is hidden is not by accident, but because someone wanted to erase it from the collective memory. Tonight, we will open an old door where a prominent Boston family left a seemingly harmless portrait. But in that frame, there is a character no one acknowledges. A portrait from 1911 appears to be just an ordinary family photo, but historians have discovered something inexplicable. One member of it never existed. A portrait from 1911. At first glance, nothing more than an ordinary family photograph. And yet, when historians looked closer, they discovered something impossible. One member of the family was never really there. Dr. Amanda Foster adjusted her reading glasses as the sepia-toned photograph caught the morning light inside the Boston Historical Society. It had arrived only hours earlier, a donation from Mrs. Catherine Mills, who explained that it had been discovered in her late grandmother's attic. Along with it came a small handwritten note. The Henley family, Boston, Massachusetts, 1911. 5 generations together. 7 figures filled the frame, posed in the formal arrangement so typical of the early 1900s. At the center sat the elderly patriarch surrounded by children, grandchildren and their young heirs. Their clothing was elegant, their posture exact, and the studio backdrop suggested this was a moment meant to be remembered. Amanda had spent more than 15 years studying Boston's family histories, and something about this image tugged at her instincts. It was perfect. Too perfect. Each face seemed arranged with mathematical precision, each expression carrying that same solemnity demanded by early photography. But then, her gaze lingered on one figure. Standing just behind the patriarch was a young woman, no more than 20, wearing a dark dress threaded with beads. Her hands folded neatly, her body turned ever so slightly toward the camera. She matched the posture of the others exactly, yet her presence seemed different. Amanda lifted a magnifying glass. The detail was astonishing for a photograph more than a century old. She could make out the tiny glint of beads, the weave of the fabric, even the fine chain of a locket resting at the woman's throat. But the light upon her face, the shadows, the gleam, was subtly wrong, not quite in the harmony with the rest of the family. A chill passed through Amanda. She made a note to investigate further. Over the years, she had learned to trust her intuition. When a photograph felt off, it usually carried a hidden story. By the next morning, she was deep in the basement archives of the Boston Public Library, surrounded by census records, directories, and yellowed newspapers. There she uncovered the Henleys' past. The patriarch William Henley had been a prominent shipping magnate. The 1910 census listed 6 family members, William and his wife Margaret, their son Robert and daughter-in-law Sarah, and 2 grandchildren, Thomas and Elizabeth. 6 names, but the photograph showed 7. Amanda turned to the society pages of 1911. The Henleys appeared often at charity galas. At business functions, always the same circle of familiar faces. No mention of the mysterious young woman. Even more troubling, William Henley's obituary in 1915 named only 6 surviving relatives. still no seventh. Who was she? Why did she appear so clearly in the family portrait, yet vanish entirely from every record of the time? Amanda pressed on. At the Massachusetts Historical Society, she found a box of letters donated by a Henley descendant in the 1980s. Handwritten correspondence stretched from 1905 to 1920. She combed through them, slowly searching for any trace of the unnamed woman. Instead, in the letters dated 1911, she sensed something unspoken, a family sorrow hinted at, but never fully described. One letter written by Robert Henley to his cousin in New York seemed to circle around a tragedy, and perhaps you feel it too. The unease of a photograph that should be ordinary, yet hides a presence history itself has tried to erase. The family portrait session was difficult for all of us, particularly father. We only hope the photographer captured what we wish to preserve. Those words penned by Sarah Henley in a letter to her sister lingered in Amanda's thoughts. The letter went on to mention technical delays, multiple exposures, and a sitting that dragged on for hours. Yet, it avoided explaining why the session had been so heavy, so emotionally charged. The silence between the lines seemed to carry more weight than the words themselves. Amanda copied the letters and left the archives that evening, the photograph still alive in her mind. As she walked through Boston's brick-lined streets, she couldn't shake the image of that mysterious young woman, the one who did not belong. Who was she meant to be? And what exactly were the Henleys so desperate to preserve or to conceal when they stood together for that portrait? Her questions brought her across the river to Cambridge to the offices of Hartwell and Associates, a photography studio whose history stretched back to 1898. Its current owner, Michael Hartwell, welcomed her warmly. He was the great-grandson of the studio's founder and kept meticulous records of the studio's earliest commissions. When Amanda mentioned the Henley portrait, Michael's face changed. Ah, the Henley Commission, he said, softly leading her to a temperature-controlled room of files. One of my great-grandfather's most difficult assignments. Amanda leaned in as Michael pulled out the fragile notes. The records revealed something extraordinary. The portrait had required 3 separate sessions across 2 weeks in March of 1911. Highly unusual considering most portraits were completed in one. The photographer's handwriting was steady, but the notes were revealing. Multiple exposure complications. Client requests necessitate advanced composition techniques. Additional equipment required for proper integration of all elements. And then in one entry, family's emotional state requires sensitive handling. Memorial aspect of commission demands utmost care. Amanda's heart quickened. Memorial aspect. Was the young woman not truly alive when the photograph was taken? Michael produced examples of his great-grandfather's other work family portraits where someone missing had been added in through the delicate art of composite photography. In one from 1909, a boy killed in a factory accident had been seamlessly integrated back into his family's portrait using an earlier photograph of him. The match was so precise light-shadows posture that no one would suspect he hadn't been present. Amanda studied the example closely. It explained so much: the odd shadows on the young woman's face, the technical challenges, the family's strained emotions. Perhaps the Henleys had wanted to keep one last image of someone already lost. But if she was deceased, if her likeness had been added after death, why was her name absent from every record? Why had she been erased so completely from the family's history? Amanda thanked Michael and left with copies of the studio's documents. Her search was far from over. She began combing burial records following the thread of absence until it led her to Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge. There, at last, she found something tangible, a small headstone in the Henley family plot, carved with the initials EMH and the dates 1888-1910. The burial records gave her name in full Eleanor Margaret Henley. She had died in December 1910, just 3 months before the portrait was taken. She had been only 22, but this discovery raised a new mystery. Eleanor's name appeared in no census, no city directory. It was as if she had lived and died in the shadows hidden from the official record. Why? Amanda's research drew her into the unspoken codes of 1910 Boston society. Eleanor, she realized, might have been considered what families at the time called a private matter, a daughter who had conceived a child outside of marriage. In Boston's rigid social world, such circumstances were often handled in secrecy. The young woman would be sent away during her pregnancy, her child discreetly adopted, out her existence quietly minimized in the family's public life. And in the uncatalogued donations of the Historical Society, Amanda stumbled upon letters, private, fragile, unguarded, that seemed to whisper confirmation of this painful truth. Have you ever wondered how many names? How many entire lives were erased in silence simply to protect a family's reputation? The letters between Margaret Henley and her sister in Vermont revealed what the official records had carefully hidden. Eleanor, whose name the letters sometimes spelled differently, as if even in writing, she was uncertain, unsteady, had been sent away in 1909. She lived quietly with relatives in a small Vermont town, far removed from Boston's polished social circles. It was there that she died, not long after giving birth. William refuses to speak of it, one letter read. But I know he blames himself for sending her away. The child is cared for by the church. We pray daily for Eleanor's soul. Another letter written only weeks before the portrait session in 1911 carried a different kind of weight. William has commissioned a family portrait. He insists that Eleanor must be included, that she belongs with us despite everything. I pray the photographer can do as he has promised. Amanda paused over those lines, the truth settling like a shadow. The Henley portrait had not simply been a family photograph. It had been an act of grief, a father's attempt to reunite his family, in death to restore a daughter who had been erased from society's gaze. Now the cryptic notes in the photographer's journals made sense. The advanced composition techniques, the repeated sessions, the demands for new equipment, it had all been in service of a single impossible goal to place Eleanor back among her family, as if she had never been absent. But how exactly had they managed it? To answer this, Amanda arranged a meeting with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a photography historian at the New England School of Photography. Dr. Walsh specialized in the technical marvels and hidden tricks of early 20th century cameras. When she studied Amanda's documentation, her voice grew hushed. What you're describing, she said, is among the most advanced composite work of its time. To create a convincing family group that includes someone no longer alive, that required extraordinary skill. Only a handful of studios in the country could have managed it. Together, they examined the original Henley photograph under specialized lighting. Slowly the truth revealed itself. Tiny differences in the grain, the faintest variations in contrast around Eleanor's figure. Dr. Walsh traced them gently with a fingertip. Here she whispered, "You can see the seams of the composite." The technique was painstaking. Eleanor's likeness had been taken from an earlier portrait, then rescaled, adjusted, and blended into the group. The living family had been carefully posed, their shadows and angles matched to hers through trial and error test after test exposure. Specialized lighting had been wheeled into the studio equipment most photographers of the era would never have possessed. And yet, beyond the technical feat, there was something heavier: the emotional weight. They were restaging a gathering that could never happen, Dr. Walsh said softly, creating a moment that belonged only to memory. A keepsake, but also an illusion. Memorial composites were not unheard of in the early 1900s, Amanda learned. Families sometimes asked photographers to add in a lost child or a soldier who had died before returning home. But usually the result was obvious: the inserted figure, stiff, mismatched, half ghostly in appearance. The Henley portrait was different. It was seamless. Eleanor appeared as present, as real as the living. Her shadows fell in the same direction. The glint of light in her locket matched the gleam of her brother's cufflink. Even the subtle shift of the other family members' postures seemed designed to open a space for her presence. This was no casual composite. It was an act of devotion. The portrait was not only about preserving an image, it was about rewriting the family itself, restoring wholeness where tragedy and shame had left a scar. Amanda knew then what she needed to search for. Next, the original portrait of Eleanor. Somewhere that earlier likeness had to exist. It was the source image that made the Henley Commission possible. Without it, Eleanor would have faded entirely into silence. Her search brought her north to the archives of the Vermont Historical Society. There, in the quiet rooms filled with brittle town ledgers and parish documents, Amanda discovered a set of records from Brattleboro. Among them was a name she now recognized all too well: Eleanor Henley. The records placed her within St. Mary's Home for Unwed Mothers, an institution that had quietly operated from 1875 to 1925. How many daughters, Amanda wondered, had passed through those same hidden doors? How many stories like Eleanor's had been folded into silence, remembered only in whispers or in the faint outlines of a photograph where they do not belong, yet cannot be forgotten? The records of St. Mary's Home, preserved by the Catholic Church and donated to the Vermont Historical Society in 1970, finally revealed Eleanor's full story. She had arrived in April of 1909, just 21 years old, and in September of that year she gave birth to a daughter. The baby, named Mary, was quietly placed with a local farming family for adoption. Eleanor remained behind at the home, working as a seamstress, helping other young women until pneumonia claimed her life in December of 1910. For Amanda, one discovery stood out. Among the records was a small portrait of Eleanor taken in early 1910. She wore a dark dress with delicate beadwork, the very same dress she appears in within the Henley family portrait. At last, the mystery made sense. This was the source image, the likeness the photographer had woven into the family tableau. Sister Catherine Murphy, the elderly archivist, explained that St. Mary's had been unusually progressive for its time. The women were encouraged to remain in contact with family when possible, and portraits were kept of every resident. These photographs often became the only memorial when tragedy struck. Eleanor's file described her as intelligent artistic, with a gift for needlework and design. Her pregnancy, the records noted, had come from a relationship with a young man, killed in an industrial accident before he could marry her. That single fact suddenly illuminated why the Henleys had acted as they did, protecting their daughter's reputation and shielding the family name. Amanda read through Eleanor's letters to her mother. They were tender, filled with longing. "I dream of being home again," one said, "of sitting with father in the garden, of helping mother with her charitable work. I know my situation has brought shame, but I hope someday to return to the family I love so dearly." Her death devastated them, especially her father William, who carried the guilt of sending her away. The composite portrait, Amanda realized, had been his way of binding the family back together, of refusing to let Eleanor be erased. Yet, the photograph held even deeper secrets. When Amanda compared Eleanor's St. Mary's portrait with the Henley family image under magnification, she noticed something uncanny. Eleanor's expression had been altered. In the original, her face was serious, touched by sadness. But in the family portrait, her features had been softened, reshaped into an image of peace. The photographer had not simply copied her likeness, he had reimagined her. Dr. Walsh called it painting with light. Multiple exposures, painstaking darkroom work, shifting posture, enhancing the beadwork of her dress, relaxing her shoulders, curving her lips into something almost serene. The portrait was not just inclusion, it was transformation. William Henley had paid 3 times the normal commission, demanding that all working materials be destroyed once the piece was finished. No trace of the artifice was to remain. To every future generation, Eleanor would appear naturally there, as though tragedy had never touched her. A technical achievement, yes, but also a father's desperate act of love and of memory. The photographer had not been hired merely to create a memorial, but to reshape memory itself, to take a family torn by loss and to present them as whole, unbroken, eternally together. In William Henley's eyes, this portrait was not simply an image. It was a correction, a rewriting of history. Eleanor would not be remembered as a shadow or a shame. She would be remembered as a daughter, standing proudly with her family exactly where she belonged. Amanda's research revealed something else, proof that the family's devotion to Eleanor had not ended with the photograph. In the quiet shelves of the Massachusetts Historical Society, she uncovered letters, papers, and financial records. Margaret Henley, Eleanor's sister, had maintained contact with Eleanor's daughter Mary, though always through intermediaries. Small gifts, folded letters, even a trust fund carefully established for Mary's education. These records showed a family that cared deeply, even as they concealed the truth from the outside world. The payments continued faithfully until 1925, when Mary, now a grown woman, married a Vermont farmer and chose to close the door on the past. She wished to live her life free from reminders of origins too complicated to explain. William, too, had not been able to let go. Amanda found evidence that he had commissioned additional portraits of Eleanor, quiet, private works created by the same photographer who had fashioned the great composite. These smaller images, hung only in the family's private rooms, never displayed to guests, but cherished as sacred tokens of the daughter they had lost. Society itself seemed willing to play along. The Boston newspapers of 1911 praised the handsome Henley family portrait, never hinting at anything unusual. Perhaps the photographer's skill was simply too perfect. Or perhaps those within the family circle already knew Eleanor's story and chose to honor the version of events the Henleys wished the world to see. One of Robert Henley's letters revealed the portrait's deeper role. "Father often sits in his study," he wrote, "gazing at our family photograph. He speaks to Eleanor sometimes, tells her our news and asks for her blessing on our decisions." The portrait had become more than an image. It had become a bridge and anchor, holding Eleanor in the family's daily life, even after death, even after silence. For Amanda, the story was as much about love as it was about art. After 3 months of searching through archives and family papers, she presented her findings to the Boston Historical Society. Descendants of the Henleys came to hear the truth that had been buried for generations. Catherine Mills, who had donated the mysterious photograph, sat in the audience with her nephews and cousins. "We always wondered why there were 7, one of them admitted. Grandmother would point to that young woman in the back and say she was family. But she never told us more. At last, Amanda could reveal it. Eleanor's identity, her story, and the extraordinary steps her father had taken to preserve her place. The Henley portrait was more than a picture. It was proof of how far grief can drive love and how art and memory can be used to resist the erasures of society. It was a masterwork of early photography, a piece of cutting-edge craft from 1910. But above all, it was a father's desperate attempt to bind together what life had broken. The audience sat in silence for a long moment after Amanda finished. What had begun as a simple curiosity about a mysterious figure in an old photograph had unfolded into something far deeper, a story of grief, love, and remembrance. Many were moved to tears by the quiet devotion the Henley family had shown, not only in commissioning the portrait, but in caring for Eleanor's daughter in secret, weaving threads of love through layers of silence. Mrs. Mills, whose donation had sparked it all, approached Amanda with tears in her eyes. "All these years we sensed someone was missing," she whispered. "Now we can finally honor her properly." The Boston Historical Society agreed. Eleanor's portrait, along with her letters and story, was placed on permanent display. 6 months later, Amanda stood in the gallery, watching visitors pause before the photograph. The wall text told the story now openly, the truth hidden for a century. And in that truth, Eleanor had been restored. From California, her great-great-granddaughter Sarah Chen had come to see the portrait for herself. She brought with her a small locket, passed quietly down through the generations. It matched the one Eleanor wore in the photograph. "My grandmother always said it belonged to someone special," Sarah said softly, "but she never told us who. Now, I know." The exhibition drew not only descendants, but scholars and historians. Conservators marveled at the technical brilliance of the composite, an innovation decades ahead of its time. Families whispered to one another as they looked, recognizing in Eleanor's story something painfully familiar: the hidden daughters, the silences, the private tragedies that shaped so many family trees. For Amanda, the portrait was no longer simply an artifact. It was proof that memory can be remade, that love can find its way through silence, that the forgotten can be restored to their rightful place. Eleanor Margaret Henley, once erased, once hidden, now stood in the gallery, her presence undeniable, Not a ghost, not a secret, but a daughter, a mother, a beloved member of her family at last. The photograph's true meaning was finally revealed. It was not merely a portrait, it was a declaration that love endures beyond shame, beyond death, beyond time itself.